He fired me on a Tuesday. 14 people in that room. Floor-to-ceiling glass Atlanta skyline behind him, the kind of light that makes everything look important. Marcus stood at the head of the table, my table, the one I'd chosen from a furniture showroom on Peachtree 7 years ago. And he slid a white envelope across the surface toward me like he was tipping a waitress. "We're moving in a new direction," he said. "Effective immediately." I looked at the envelope. Then I looked at Amber sitting 3 chairs to my left in the seat that used to be mine before someone quietly moved my nameplate to the corner last month. She didn't look back. I picked up the envelope, stood, buttoned my blazer single button slow, and collected my notebook and my pen from the table. Nobody spoke. I walked to the door, and right before I touched the handle, I checked my watch. 9 days. That was all I needed. Before we go any further, what time is it where you are right now? Drop your time and your country in the comments. I grew up in Decatur watching my mother count quarters on the kitchen table every Sunday night. Not because she was poor. She wasn't, not exactly. But she'd married a man who controlled every dollar that came into the house. And by the time she understood what that meant, her name wasn't on anything. Not the house, not the car, not the account the direct deposits went into. When my father left, and he did leave on a Wednesday morning with a single duffel bag, as if he'd been planning it for years, my mother had a college degree, 18 years of marriage, and $340 in a checking account she'd opened in secret 6 months before. I was 11. I watched her sit at that kitchen table for a long time after he drove away. She didn't cry. That was the thing I remembered most. She just sat there, very still, looking at the wall. And then she got up, washed her hands at the sink, and started making dinner. I never forgot the stillness. I didn't understand it then. I do now. I met Marcus Reed at an alumni mixer at Georgia State in the spring of 2009. He was loud in the good way, the kind of loud that fills a room without taking anything from it. He had ideas, real ones. He'd been working at a mid-sized logistics company for 3 years, and he could see exactly what they were doing wrong, and exactly how he would fix it if it were his. He talked about it the way some people talk about places they've never been but are certain they belong. I liked that about him. I was working in corporate finance at the time, junior analyst position, learning how money moved through companies, the way water moves through pipes, pressure points, weak joints, places where things leaked without anyone noticing. I was good at it. My manager, a quiet man named Gerald, who wore the same 4 ties on rotation, told me once that I had the kind of mind that found the number behind the number. He meant it as a compliment. I took it as a job description. Marcus and I dated for 2 years before he told me about the business idea properly. Not the mixer version, the real version. He sat across from me at a kitchen table not unlike my mother's and spread out 3 pages of handwritten notes and said, "I can't do this without someone who understands the money side. I mean, really understands it." I looked at his notes for a long time. The idea was sound. A boutique supply chain consulting firm targeting mid-market companies in the Southeast, businesses big enough to have real logistics problems, small enough to be ignored by the major players. The gap was real. The timing was right. Atlanta was growing in ways that most people hadn't fully mapped yet. "How much do you have?" I asked. 60,000, he said. "You?" I had 43,000 in a savings account I'd been building since my first paycheck at 22. I thought about my mother at the kitchen table. I thought about Gerald and the number behind the number. "Okay," I said. "But I want to talk about structure first." We incorporated in March 2011. Reed Consulting Group, LLC, his name on the door, because we both agreed without saying it directly that his face was the one clients would trust in a first meeting. Marcus had the handshake. He had the voice, the height, The easy confidence that translated in a boardroom full of men who'd already decided what kind of person they were going to listen to. I was fine with that. I understood the assignment. What we didn't discuss out loud, what I made sure of quietly through a corporate attorney. I hired separately a woman named Patricia, who worked out of a small office in Buckhead and charged $340 an hour and was worth every cent was the ownership structure. Marcus held 49%. Clean, simple on every document we ever showed anyone. The other 51% sat inside a holding company called Navarre Capital LLC, registered in Delaware, managed by a trustee, beneficially owned by one person, me. It wasn't deception. I want to be clear about that. Marcus knew Navarre existed. He signed the operating agreement. What he never did, what he never thought to do, was read past the first 2 pages. He trusted me with the numbers the way he always had. The way my father had trusted my mother with the house until he didn't need the house anymore. I thought about that sometimes. Not with bitterness. More the way you think about a lesson that cost someone else a great deal to learn, and you were just paying attention in the room. The first 7 years were good. Genuinely good. Not the performance of good that I've seen in other marriages, the kind where both people are working very hard to look like something they've stopped being. We built something real. By 2018, the firm had 11 full-time employees, 3 anchor clients generating recurring revenue and a reputation in Atlanta's business community that Marcus wore like a second suit. I ran the finances. I structured every deal. I sat in the back of the room during pitches and passed Marcus notes on a yellow legal pad and watched him deliver them like he'd thought of them himself, which over time, I think he genuinely came to believe. That was the first crack, though. I didn't name it that way at the time. It happened slowly, the way these things always do. A meeting he didn't tell me about until after. A decision made over lunch with a client I'd never met. Small things. The kind you explain away the first 4 times and then stop explaining and just file somewhere quiet. The Bic pen was his idea. First week of business, before we could afford real office supplies, he'd bought a box of blue Bic ballpoints from a CVS on Ponce de Leon and written our first client check from a joint business account we'd opened that morning. He'd handed the pen to me after and said, "Keep this for when we make it." I kept it in a small ceramic dish on my desk for 11 years. The morning after he fired me, I noticed it was still there. He hadn't thought to take it. The chair was the first thing. Not the first sign, I know, that now looking back the way you do when everything has already happened and the timeline rearranges itself into something that makes sense. But it was the first physical thing. Concrete. Undeniable. The kind of detail that lodges in your body before your mind catches up. It was a Monday in early February. I came in at 7:15 the way I always did, before the parking deck filled up, before the front desk staff arrived, before Marcus, who hadn't seen 7:15 voluntarily since 2014. I walked into the conference room on 22 to set up for our 9 o'clock with a distribution client out of Savannah, and my chair wasn't at the head of the table. It was in the corner, pushed against the wall at an angle like someone had moved it out of the way and not bothered to move it back. I stood in the doorway for a moment. Then I walked over, pulled the chair back to where it belonged, and sat down and opened my laptop. I didn't mention it to Marcus. I don't know why exactly. Some instinct I didn't examine too closely. The password change came 3 weeks later. I found out the way you find out about things that were meant to be kept from you, not through confrontation, but through a small, ordinary moment that shouldn't have mattered. I was trying to pull a Q4 reconciliation file from our internal server on a Thursday afternoon, something I'd done dozens of times, and my credentials didn't work. Access denied. The kind of message that appears in plain red text and sits there waiting for you to decide what to do with it. I called our IT contractor, a young man named Devin, who handled our systems remotely from an office in Marietta. He went quiet on the phone for a moment that lasted slightly too long. "The admin credentials were updated last week," he said. "I assumed you knew." "Of course," I said. "I must have missed the email." "Can you remind me of the new ones?" Another pause. "I'd need authorization from Mr. Reed to share those with a third party." I thanked him and hung up. I sat at my desk for a while. After that, my office was at the end of the hall corner office. So 2 windows, the one I'd chosen specifically because, on clear days, you could see Stone Mountain in the distance if you stood at the right angle. I looked at Stone Mountain for a while. It didn't do anything helpful. That evening, I called Patricia. Patricia Okafor had been my attorney since the beginning. She was 51 originally from Lagos, by way of Howard University. And she had the kind of precision in conversation that made you feel slightly reckless by comparison. She didn't speak unnecessarily. When she asked a question, it was always the right question. "Tell me what changed," she said. I told her about the chair, the password, the meetings I'd stopped being invited to 3 in the past 6 weeks, all with clients I'd personally brought to the firm. I told her about the morning 2 months ago when I'd come in early and found Marcus and Amber in his office with the door mostly closed and a spreadsheet on the screen that disappeared when I knocked. Amber had joined the firm 8 months prior as Director of Business Development. She was good at her job. I'd been the one to recommend hiring her, which is the kind of thing that feels important to say and also completely beside the point. "Has he made any moves on the corporate structure?" Patricia asked. "Not that I've seen." "Has he asked you about Navarre recently?" "No." "Does he know you've been in contact with me?" "He knows you're my attorney. He doesn't know we've spoken this month." Patricia was quiet for a moment. I could hear her writing something down. "Elizabeth," she said, "I want you to do something for me. I want you to go home tonight and locate every physical document related to Navarre Capital and the original operating agreement. Not copies, originals. I know where they are." "Good. Don't move them. Just know where they are." I asked her if she was worried. "I'm careful," she said. "There's a difference." March came and went. Then April. Marcus started traveling more. Chicago, Charlotte, Nashville, always for client meetings, always with Amber listed as accompanying staff on the travel requests that crossed my desk for budget approval. I approved them. I kept my face neutral and my handwriting steady, and I signed every one. At home, things were polite. That was the word for it. We ate dinner together 3 or 4 nights a week. We talked about the business, about clients, about a kitchen renovation he wanted to do in the spring. He was attentive in the particular way of someone who is managing you, present enough to forestall suspicion, distant enough to maintain momentum towards something else. I noticed. I said nothing. In May, he hired a new CFO without telling me. I found out from the offer letter that arrived by mistake in my email, a thread I wasn't supposed to see a forward that went one address too far. The new CFO's name was Brandon Cole, 29 years old. No corporate finance background. His last position had been as financial analyst at a real estate development firm where, based on his LinkedIn profile, he had been employed for 14 months. I read the offer letter twice. Salary $180,000. Start date June 1st. My salary was $165,000. I had built the financial architecture of this company from a kitchen table with $43,000 and a Bic pen. I closed the email. I opened a new browser tab. I pulled up the Delaware Division of Corporations website and confirmed for the first time in 2 years that Navarre Capital LLC was still in good standing. It was. I closed the laptop. I went to the kitchen and made a cup of coffee, dark roast, no sugar, and stood at the window looking at the backyard where the hydrangeas I'd planted 4 years ago were just starting to come up along the fence line. I thought about my mother at the kitchen table. I thought not this time. The meeting was called for 9 o'clock. I found out about it the night before not from Marcus, but from a calendar notification that still synced to my phone from the shared company system. Someone had forgotten to remove me from the distribution list, or hadn't thought to. Either way, the notification appeared at 8:47 p.m. while I was reading in the living room, all-hands leadership meeting. Conference room, 22 mandatory attendance. Marcus was in his home office with the door closed. I could hear him on the phone, voice low, the particular register he used when he didn't want to be overheard. I put my book down. I looked at the notification for a long time. Then I went to bed. I dressed carefully the next morning. Not differently than usual, that was the point. Same routine. Dark blazer, pressed slacks, low heels. The single piece of jewelry I wore every day, a thin gold bracelet my mother had given me when I passed my CFA exam, cold and familiar against my wrist. I made coffee. I fed the cat. I drove to the office. I arrived at 8:45. 14 minutes before the meeting I hadn't been told about. Devin from IT was in the lobby when I walked in, which was unusual. He was talking to the building security coordinator, a heavy-set man named Ray, who handled access badges. Devin saw me and looked immediately at his shoes. That told me everything I needed to know about the shape of the morning. The conference room on 22 was already full when I walked in. 14 people, all senior staff department heads, the 2 account directors, Brandon Cole. In a suit that was slightly too large for him, sitting in the chair that used to be mine. Before it migrated to the corner, and then migrated back, and then migrated to the corner again. Amber was at the far end of the table, with a legal pad and a pen positioned the way an executive assistant positions herself when she is about to be introduced as something other than an executive assistant. Marcus was standing at the head of the table. He saw me come in. Something moved across his face. Not guilt, not quite. Something more operational than that. A recalibration. "Elizabeth," he said. "Good. Have a seat." There was one empty chair. Not at the table. Against the wall near the door, slightly apart from everything, the way you'd seat someone who was present but not participating. I looked at it. I looked at Marcus. I sat down at the table in the nearest open chair, which happened to be between 2 account directors who both shifted almost imperceptibly when I sat. Marcus cleared his throat. He talked for 6 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the wall behind his head, the one I'd chosen from the same furniture showroom as the table, a simple white face with black numbers that had hung in that room for 7 years. He talked about evolution, about growth requiring difficult decisions, about companies that failed to adapt and companies that didn't. He used the word realignment 4 times and going forward 3 times, and not once did he say my name. Then he picked up a white envelope from the table and held it out toward me. "Effective immediately," he said. "Your position as CFO is being eliminated. The firm thanks you for your contributions." The room was absolutely silent. I looked at the envelope. I looked at Amber, who was writing something on her legal pad with great concentration, the way a person writes when they are trying very hard not to exist in a room. I looked at Brandon Cole, 29 years old, 14 months at a real estate firm, sitting in my chair in a suit that didn't fit. I looked at Marcus. His expression was composed, prepared. He'd practiced this, I realized, probably more than once. There was a particular smoothness to his face that only comes from rehearsal, the ironed-out version of something that had once had more wrinkles in it. I stood up. I took the envelope. I did not open it. I picked up my notebook, the one I'd carried into every meeting in this room. For 7 years, black cover college ruled. I was on my 14th volume, and I picked up my pen, and I buttoned my blazer with one hand slowly, the way my mother used to button her coat before she walked into any room where she expected to be underestimated. Nobody spoke. 14 people, and the only sounds were the air conditioning and the faint noise of Atlanta 22 floors below us, indifferent and ongoing. I walked to the door. Right before I touched the handle, I turned back not to look at Marcus, but to look at the clock. 8:58 a.m., Tuesday, June 3rd, 9 days until the quarterly board review. 9 days until the window Patricia had identified 6 weeks ago, the one written into the original operating agreement in language that Marcus had never read past page 2. The clause that allowed the majority shareholder to call an emergency meeting of the full ownership group with 9 business days' notice. 9 days. I touched the handle. The door opened. The hallway was empty and bright and smelled like the carpet cleaner the building used on Monday nights. I walked to the elevator. I pressed the button. I watched the doors open. Inside the elevator, I finally looked at the envelope. I turned it over once in my hands, ran my thumb along the sealed edge, and then I slid it into my blazer pocket without opening it. The doors closed. I watched my own reflection in the brushed steel dark blazer gold bracelet face, composed eyes steady. And I thought about the holding company registered in Delaware, and the 51%, and the Tahoe Saumaljan Navy sitting in the locked drawer of the filing cabinet in my home office. The elevator reached the lobby. I walked out into the Atlanta morning. I did not look back at the building, not yet. I stopped at a Publix on the way home. Not because I needed anything. I walked every aisle slowly, the way you do when your body needs to be somewhere ordinary, while your mind works through something that isn't. I put a bag of dark roast coffee in my cart. A bunch of hydrangeas from the flower display near the entrance, pale blue, the kind that reminded me of the ones along the back fence. A rotisserie chicken I wouldn't eat until the next day. The cashier asked if I'd found everything okay. "Yes," I said. "Thank you." I drove home. I parked in the garage. I sat in the car for 4 minutes, not thinking exactly. More like letting the morning settle into its correct shape before I brought it inside. Then I got out, carried my groceries in, put the hydrangeas in a glass vase on the kitchen counter, and started a pot of coffee. The filing cabinet was in my home office, tucked against the wall beside the bookcase. Gunmetal gray 2 drawers, a lock I'd had rekeyed 3 years ago after Marcus mentioned offhandedly that he couldn't find something in there and had tried to open it. He hadn't asked about it again. That was the thing about Marcus. He moved on from obstacles, quickly redirected his energy toward easier terrain. It was one of the qualities that made him good at sales and less good at everything that required sustained attention to things that didn't want to cooperate. I unlocked the bottom drawer with the key I kept on a ring, separate from my car keys, separate from my house keys, on a plain silver ring with no identifying markers that lived in the inside zip pocket of my everyday bag. The folder was there. Navy blue heavy stock, the kind of folder Patricia's office used for original documents. I lifted it out and carried it to my desk. I sat down. I opened it. I didn't need to read it. I knew what was in it. But there is something about seeing a thing in writing the actual paper, the actual ink, the signatures in the margins, that makes it real in a way that memory alone doesn't achieve. My name, the percentage, the date. Patricia's notary stamp on the last page, slightly smudged in the lower left corner from the day we'd signed in her office during a rainstorm. And the humidity had been doing something to everything. 51%. Navarre Capital LLC. Beneficial owner Elizabeth Ann Crawford. I closed the folder. I put it on the desk in front of me and poured my coffee and sat there looking at it. Patricia answered on the second ring. "It happened," I said. A pause. Not surprised. Patricia didn't do surprise. More like the pause of a person confirming a calculation they'd already run. "This morning, 9 o'clock. Conference room 22. 14 witnesses. Did he give you paperwork?" "An envelope. I haven't opened it." "Open it now. Tell me what it says." I opened the envelope. Single-page company letterhead, 3 paragraphs. Termination of employment, effective immediately position, eliminated 2-week severance return of company property within 5 business days. Signed by Marcus in the looping signature he developed sometime around 2016, when he decided signatures should look like something. I read it to her. "Okay," Patricia said. She was writing. I could hear the specific sound of her pen à Mont Blanc she'd told me once, because she billed by the hour. And she liked the weight of it. "Elizabeth, I need you to listen carefully. Do not respond to that letter. Do not contact Marcus directly. Do not go back to the office for any reason until I tell you to. I understand. I'm going to file the notice today. 9 business days from today is June 16th, I said. Monday. Correct." Another pause. "How are you?" It was the first time she'd asked me that in 11 years of working together. I looked at the navy folder on my desk. I looked at the hydrangeas on the kitchen counter through the open doorway, pale blue in the afternoon light. "I'm fine," I said. And I meant it, which surprised me slightly. "Good," Patricia said. "Stay fine. I'll call you tomorrow." The 9 days were quiet. That was the part I hadn't anticipated, not the logistics, which Patricia managed with the systematic efficiency of someone dismantling a structure they'd helped build for exactly this purpose, but the quality of the silence. The house felt different without the low-grade tension of the previous months. The performance of normalcy I hadn't fully acknowledged I'd been giving until I stopped having to give it. Marcus texted on Wednesday. Then Thursday. Short messages, clinical the language of someone who'd had them reviewed. "Please confirm receipt of termination letter. Please arrange return of company laptop and credentials." I forwarded each one to Patricia and didn't respond. He called on Friday evening. I watched his name on the screen until it stopped. I slept well that week. Better than I had in months. I woke early each morning and made coffee and sat at my desk and worked through the documents Patricia sent me. Amendments, shareholder resolutions, the meeting notice that went out formally on day 1 to every registered party in the operating agreement. I read each one carefully. I signed where I needed to sign. I initialed where I needed to initial. On the 5th day, Patricia called to tell me Marcus had retained an attorney. "He's claiming the Navarre structure is invalid," she said, arguing he didn't have full disclosure at signing. He signed the operating agreement. He did. His attorney is arguing duress and insufficient counsel. He had his own attorney present at closing. "I know," Patricia said. "I was there. I have the photographs, the sign-in sheet, and the billing records from his attorney's firm for that date." A brief pause. His argument isn't going to survive contact with a courtroom. But it tells us he's been briefed on the structure. He knows what's coming. That meant Amber had found someone who could read a corporate document. Or Marcus had finally read past page 2 himself. Either way, it didn't change anything, just meant the room on June 16th would be more crowded with lawyers and more interesting for it. "Does it change our timeline?" I asked. "No," Patricia said. "We proceed as planned." On the 8th night, Marcus came home. I hadn't seen him since the morning of the firing. He had a key, of course. The house was in both our names, one of the few things that was. He came in through the garage door at 9:15. I was in the living room reading. I heard the door, heard his footsteps on the kitchen tile, heard him stop. I turned a page. He appeared in the doorway. He was in a suit tie, loosened the Breitling on his wrist, catching the lamplight. He looked like a man who had spent 8 days practicing a conversation and was no longer certain it would land the way he'd rehearsed. "Elizabeth," he said. "Marcus," I said. He looked at me for a moment. Then at the room, the hydrangeas on the end table, the coffee cup on the coaster, the navy folder sitting on the side table beside my book, visible and unremarkable. His eyes stopped on the folder. Something shifted in his face. Just for a second. A flicker of something that was almost recognition. "We should talk," he said. I looked at him over the top of my book. I thought about 14 people in a glass-walled room, and a white envelope slid across a table like a tip. I thought about my mother at the kitchen table, very still, looking at the wall. "Tomorrow," I said. "I have an early morning." He stood in the doorway a moment longer. Then he turned and walked back down the hall toward the guest room, where he'd apparently decided without discussion that he was sleeping. I listened to his footsteps. I listened to the door close. I looked at the Navy folder. 1 day left. The email went out at 6 o'clock on a Monday morning. I know the exact time because Patricia forwarded it to me at 6:04 with a single line beneath it, "See below." No response needed. Stay the course. The subject line was "Reed Consulting Group Exciting New Chapter." Marcus had sent it to every client contact, every vendor, every industry acquaintance whose email address lived in the company's CRM system. 412 recipients. I counted later when I had the patience for it. The body of the email was 3 paragraphs. The first announced that Reed Consulting Group was rebranding as Meridian Strategy Partners, effective immediately. New logo, new website, new positioning. The second paragraph described the leadership team, Marcus's founder and CEO Brandon Cole, as CFO Amber Washington, as Chief Growth Officer. 3 names, 3 titles. A company that had existed for 11 years. My name was not in the email, not in the leadership section, not in a transitional acknowledgement, not in a footnote. 11 years of financial architecture, of deal structuring, of sitting in the back of rooms, passing notes on yellow legal pads, erased with the clean efficiency of a find and replace function run on every document at once. I read the email twice. I put my phone face down on the kitchen counter. I poured my coffee. The rebrand had clearly been in preparation for weeks, possibly months. By 9 that morning, the new website was live. I checked from my laptop, the kind of checking you do knowing it will make you feel worse and doing it anyway. Clean design, navy and gold color scheme, a mission statement that used the word innovative twice in 4 sentences. Stock photography of people in conference rooms who did not look like anyone I had ever worked with. A team page with 3 headshots. Marcus in a photographer-lit portrait that he'd clearly had taken recently, Brandon Cole looking slightly startled, Amber in a blazer I recognized from a company retreat 2 years ago, cropped and relit. The history section said the firm was founded in 2011 by Marcus Reed with a vision for transforming mid-market logistics consulting in the Southeast. Just Marcus. Just his vision. Just his name. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Then I closed the laptop and called Patricia. "He's moving fast," she said. She didn't sound alarmed. Patricia processed information the way good surgeons operate, with a focus so complete it left no room for anything that wasn't relevant. "He notified clients before we could get to them," I said. "Expected. He's trying to establish continuity, make the rebrand feel like a natural evolution rather than a disruption. If clients think the company is stable and progressing, they're less likely to ask questions when the ownership situation becomes public. Does it work? In the short term, possibly. In the long term," she paused. "Elizabeth, what he's done this morning is actually useful to us. He's put in writing to 412 people that he is the sole founder and controlling authority of this company. When the shareholder meeting happens tomorrow and the actual ownership structure becomes public record, every single one of those people will have received a document that contradicts it. That's not a good position for him to be in. I hadn't thought about it that way." I sat with it for a moment. He also, Patricia continued, just publicly named Amber Washington as Chief Growth Officer of a company she has no equity stake in and no authority over, using corporate assets and communication channels that are controlled by the majority shareholder. A brief pause that contained something that might, in another attorney, have been satisfaction. "We'll be adding that to the file." The calls started coming in by noon. Not many 4-5, but from the right people. Clients I'd worked with directly for years, people who knew my voice and knew my work, and had my personal cell number because I'd given it to them during late-night deal closings and quarterly reviews that ran past midnight. James Whitfield, who ran a distribution operation out of Savannah that had been our anchor client for 6 years, called at 12:30. "Elizabeth," he said, "I just got an email from Marcus that doesn't mention you anywhere. I wanted to make sure I'm not misreading something." "You're not misreading anything, James." A pause. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine. There are some changes happening at the firm. I can't say more than that right now, but I appreciate you reaching out." "Okay," he said slowly. "You know, I've always done business with Reed Consulting because of the work you do on the financial side. I want you to know that." "I know," I said. "Thank you." I got off the phone and wrote his name in my notebook. Below it, I wrote 3 more names, the other clients who'd called. Then I wrote the date and the time and underlined it once. That evening, Marcus came into the kitchen while I was making dinner. He had changed out of his suit gray sweatpants, a t-shirt from a charity golf tournament we'd attended in 2019, the silver Breitling still on his wrist because I was not sure he knew how to be without it. He opened the refrigerator, looked into it for a moment, closed it. Then he leaned against the counter in the particular way he had when he wanted to seem casual while saying something he'd prepared. "I heard you've been talking to some of our clients," he said. I was cutting vegetables. I did not look up. "James Whitfield called me," I said. "I didn't call him. Elizabeth." His voice shifted slightly, still controlled, but with an edge underneath it now, the sound of a man who has been certain of something and has recently become less certain. "I think it would be better for everyone if you let this transition happen cleanly." I put the knife down. I turned around and looked at him. In 11 years of marriage, I had learned Marcus's face, the way you learn a city you've lived in for a long time. The landmarks and the shortcuts and the places that look like one thing but are another. The expression he was wearing now was one I hadn't seen often. It was the expression of a man standing on ground he had believed to be solid and has just felt it move slightly underfoot. Good, I thought. "Marcus," I said, "I think you should get some rest tonight. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." He looked at me. The Breitling caught the kitchen light. "What's tomorrow?" he said. And the way he said it, the slight lift at the end, the almost question told me that his attorney had briefed him on the possibility, but not the certainty that he'd been hoping it was a threat rather than a plan, that some part of him had still believed I would negotiate or retreat or ask for something he could give me in a controlled way that kept his world intact. I turned back to the cutting board. "Tomorrow," I said, "is June 16th. I picked up the knife. I heard him stand there for a moment, the particular silence of a man rearranging something in his mind that doesn't want to be rearranged. Then I heard his footsteps move down the hallway. The guest room door opened and closed. I finished making dinner. I ate alone at the kitchen table. I thought about my mother counting quarters on a Sunday night and the $340 and the duffel bag and the stillness. I thought she would have liked Patricia. I washed my dishes. I went to bed at 10 o'clock. I slept without interruption until 5:15, when my alarm went off and the last day began. Patricia arrived at my house at 6:45. She drove herself, no assistant, no paralegal, in a dark green Volvo that she parked precisely at the curb in front of the hydrangeas. She came to the door carrying a leather document case the color of cognac and a cup of coffee from the Starbucks on Piedmont that she had clearly stopped for with the same deliberateness she brought to everything. I let her in. She sat at my kitchen table and opened the document case and laid out 7 folders in a row, left to right. Each one labeled in her handwriting the careful vertical script of a woman who had decided early in life that her handwriting would not be a liability. "Sit," she said. I sat. Today has one objective, she said. Not justice, not confrontation, not a speech. One objective, the legal transfer of operational authority to the majority shareholder. Everything else is noise. Are we clear? We're clear. Good. She pushed the first folder toward me. Let's go through it. The notice had gone out 9 business days ago, certified mail to Marcus personally to the registered agent of Reed Consulting Group, and to the 2 minority shareholders who existed on paper as part of the original corporate structure. Small stakes, old relationships. A former mentor of Marcus's named Harold, who held 2% and hadn't attended a company function in 4 years. And a silent investor named Diane Chen, who held 1% and ran a private equity operation out of Buckhead, and had, according to Patricia, already confirmed her attendance and her proxy vote. 3% between them. Combined with Elizabeth's 51%, the math was not close. Marcus held 46%. I want to be precise about that. The 49% he'd always believed was actually 46% after 2 small equity adjustments made in 2017 and 2019 during capital raises that he had approved without reading the dilution clauses Patricia had drafted with the careful neutrality of someone building an argument 1 brick at a time. I had not told him about the dilution. He had signed both documents. Patricia had kept the originals. Walk me through the $47.3 million, I said. Not because I didn't know. Because I wanted to say it out loud one time in a room where it meant something. Patricia opened the 3rd folder. As of close of business Friday, she said the firm's most recent independent valuation conducted in March for the purpose of the refinancing Marcus initiated, which he will shortly appreciate, was not entirely in his interest, placed Reed Consulting Group at a total enterprise value of $92.8 million. She turned a page. Navarre Capital's 51% beneficial interest therefore represents $47.328 million in equity value. I looked at the number on the page. Typed, not handwritten. A clean figure in a clean column. $47,328,000. I thought about $43,000 in a savings account. I thought about a Bic pen from a CVS on Ponce de Leon. I thought about 11 years of yellow legal pads and late nights and quarterly reviews and the number behind the number. And Marcus's 46%, I said. $42.688 million. Patricia closed the folder. Subject to the outcome of today's meeting, his position as CEO and any severance structure the new controlling party chooses to extend. She said it without emphasis, just information. Just numbers. Okay, I said. There's one more thing. She opened the 5th folder. Marcus's attorney filed an emergency injunction Friday afternoon, attempting to block today's meeting on grounds that the notice period was procedurally invalid. I looked at her. It was denied, she said at 9:15 Friday evening, by Judge Renee Abernathy of the Fulton County Superior Court, who reviewed the original operating agreement and found the notice fully compliant. A pause. Judge Abernathy clerked at the firm that drafted our operating agreement in 2011. She is familiar with the language. She said this the way she said most things, as a plain statement of fact. But I had worked with Patricia for 11 years, and I knew the difference between a fact and a fact she found satisfying. You knew she might get that filing, I said. I knew it was possible, Patricia said. I also knew we were procedurally airtight. She closed the 5th folder. I don't leave things to chance, Elizabeth. You know that. We arrived at the building at 8:40. 2 cars, Patricia and I in her Volvo, and behind us a second vehicle carrying 2 colleagues from her firm, a senior associate named Thomas, who had the quiet, contained energy of someone who had prepared for this specific morning for longer than today, and a paralegal named Kezia, who carried a banker's box of documents and moved through the lobby like someone who had walked into hundreds of rooms expecting resistance and found it rarely matched the preparation. The lobby security desk. Ray, the same heavy-set man, who had been talking to Devin from IT on the morning of the firing 2 weeks ago in what felt like a different chapter of a story that was only now reaching its correct ending. Ray looked at me, then at Patricia, then at Thomas and Kezia in the banker's box. "Miss Crawford," he said. "Good morning, Ray," I said. "We have a shareholder meeting scheduled for 9 o'clock in conference room 22. Our guests should all be on the access list." He looked at his screen. He looked at it for slightly longer than necessary, the pause of a man receiving a quiet instruction from someone who had not anticipated today going this direction. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it. Put it face down. "You're all clear," he said. The elevator opened on 22 at 8:53. Diane Chen was already there, standing in the hallway outside the conference room in a charcoal suit, phone in hand. She was 63, silver-haired, and had the posture of someone who had sat at the head of enough tables to be comfortable at any of them. She looked at me when I stepped off the elevator. "Elizabeth," she said. "Diane, thank you for coming." "I read the notice carefully," she said. "Then I read the operating agreement." A pause that contained something dry and precise. "I should have read it more carefully in 2011. We all should have read more carefully in 2011, I said. Harold arrived at 8:58, slightly breathless in a tan suit that had been correct for his body approximately 15 years ago. He shook my hand with both of his and said nothing useful but meant well. At 9:02, the elevator opened again. Marcus stepped out. He was in a suit charcoal, well fitted the Breitling on his wrist. His attorney was with him, a tall man named Jeffrey, who carried a briefcase and wore the expression of someone who had told his client the odds and had not been listened to. Behind them, Amber in the oversized blazer, dark burgundy braids, a legal pad pressed against her chest like a shield. Marcus saw me standing at the head of the conference room table. He stopped. Not for long, a second, maybe two. But it was enough, the particular stillness of a man whose mental architecture has just encountered a wall where he believed there was a door. Then Jeffrey put a hand briefly on his arm, and they walked forward and into the room. I watched them come. I thought about the chair in the corner, the password change. The envelope slid across the table like a tip. The email to 412 people that did not contain my name. I thought, 9 days. I sat down at the head of the table. Patricia sat to my right. Thomas opened the banker's box. Kezia placed a document in front of every seat with the quiet efficiency of someone setting a table before a meal that had been a long time coming. Marcus sat down across from me. He looked at the document in front of him. He looked at me. "What is this?" he said. "It's the agenda," I said. "For the shareholder meeting." He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at Jeffrey. Jeffrey opened his briefcase. Mr. Reed, Patricia said before Jeffrey could speak. The emergency injunction filed Friday afternoon was denied by Judge Abernathy at 9:15 p.m. I have the order here if you'd like to review it. She slid a copy across the table without looking up. We are fully authorized to proceed. Shall we begin? The room was very quiet. Outside, 22 floors below Atlanta, went about its morning traffic on Peachtree. A delivery truck on the street below the ordinary machinery of a city that did not know or care what was about to happen in a glass-walled conference room above it. Marcus looked at me one more time. I looked back. Yes, I said to Patricia. Let's begin. Patricia called the meeting to order at 9:04. She did it the way she did everything, without theater, without preamble, with the clean efficiency of someone who understood that the most powerful moments don't require amplification. She stated the date. She stated the location. She stated the purpose. She read the relevant clause from the operating agreement in a voice that was neither loud nor soft. but simply precise, each word landing in the room like something placed rather than thrown. This is a duly noticed special meeting of the shareholders of Reed Consulting Group, LLC, called pursuant to Section 7.3 of the Operating Agreement dated March 14, 2011. By Navarre Capital, LLC, holder of 51% of the outstanding membership interests. Jeffrey started to speak. Patricia continued without acknowledging him. Present and voting Navarre Capital, LLC, 51%. Diane Chen, individually 1%. Harold James Morrison, 2%. Marcus D. Reed, individually 46%. She looked up from the document. Quorum is present. We will proceed. Jeffrey said, "We object to the characterization of Navarre Capital's interest as..." "Your objection is noted," Patricia said. It was also noted in the Fulton County Superior Court filing and denied at 9:15 Friday evening. The order is in front of you. If you'd like to take 10 minutes to read it, we can accommodate that. Jeffrey looked at the order. He looked at his client. Marcus was looking at me. I had decided sometime during the 9 days that I would not make a speech. Not because I didn't have things to say. I had years of things to say, the meetings I hadn't been invited to, the password, the chair in the corner, the email to 412 people. I could have said all of it. Some part of me had imagined saying it in the particular way you imagine conversations at 3 in the morning that feel necessary and then feel less so in daylight. But I thought about my mother. The stillness, how she had not cried, how she had gotten up and washed her hands and made dinner, and how that quiet, self-contained competence had said more than any speech she could have given in that kitchen. I thought the documents will say it. Let the documents speak. Thomas distributed the shareholder resolution at 9:11. 1 page. Clean, simple language. The kind of document Patricia drafted when she wanted no ambiguity to survive contact with it. Resolution of the members of Reed Consulting Group, LLC. Upon the affirmative vote of members holding a majority of the outstanding membership interests, the following actions are hereby approved, effective immediately upon adoption. 1. The removal of Marcus D. Reed from the position of Chief Executive Officer. 2. The appointment of Elizabeth Ann Crawford as Chief Executive Officer. 3. The revocation of all operational authority granted to Marcus D. Reed pending a review of company transactions from January 1st of this year to present. 4. The immediate suspension of the rebranding initiative announced June 9th pending majority shareholder review. Marcus picked up the document. He read it. He put it down. Something happened to his face then, not the collapse I might once have imagined, a tears not rage. Something quieter and in some ways worse. The expression of a man watching something he built with his own hands become in the space of a typed page. No longer his. I recognized it. I had worn it briefly in an elevator 2 weeks ago. "You can't do this," he said. His voice was level. Almost. There was something underneath it, a frequency just below control. Marcus Jeffrey said quietly, "She can't do this. This company has my name on it. I built this, Mr. Reed." Patricia's voice was not unkind. It was simply final, the way a door closing is final, not hostile, just shut. The operating agreement you signed in 2011 is explicit on this point. The majority shareholder has the authority to call this meeting and to act on the resolutions presented. You signed that agreement with independent counsel present. The record is clear. I didn't know what I was signing. You had an attorney. I didn't read. He stopped himself. The room absorbed the silence. Diane Chen looked at the window. Harold looked at his hands. Amber, 3 seats down, had stopped writing on her legal pad. She was looking at Marcus with an expression I hadn't expected to see on her face, something that wasn't quite sympathy and wasn't quite regret, but was in the same neighborhood as both. Jeffrey leaned toward Marcus and said something low and brief. Marcus sat back. "We'll proceed to the vote," Patricia said. Navarre Capital, LLC. 51%. In favor. Diane Chen, 1%. In favor. She looked at Harold. Harold cleared his throat. He looked at Marcus, a long look, the look of a man who had known someone for a long time and was making a calculation that had nothing to do with sentiment. Harold Morrison, 2%. In favor. Patricia didn't change her expression. Marcus D. Reed, 46%. Marcus looked at me. For a long moment, he just looked at me across the table, past the documents and the folders and the water glasses. And 11 years of everything that had happened in rooms like this one and outside of them. I looked back. My hands were in my lap, folded still. The gold bracelet on my wrist, cold and familiar. Against, he said. The resolution passes, Patricia said, with 54% in favor. Elizabeth Ann Crawford is hereby appointed Chief Executive Officer of Reed Consulting Group, LLC, effective immediately. The next part happened the way things happen, when they have been long prepared for and are finally simply occurring. Patricia produced the transfer documents. Thomas laid out the amended certificates. Kezia moved through the room with the quiet precision of someone who had done this before and would do it again, placing papers, collecting signatures, maintaining the clean chain of custody that made everything unassailable. Jeffrey made 2 more objections. Patricia addressed both with the specific clause numbers that invalidated them and moved on. Marcus signed what he was required to sign. His attorney had clearly told him that resistance at this stage created exposure rather than protection. And whatever else Marcus was, he had always been in the end pragmatic. He signed the CEO transition document at 9:38. The Breitling on his wrist caught the light as his pen moved across the page, silver and solid, and suddenly in this room, on this morning, slightly beside the point. He put the pen down. He stood up. He looked at me one more time across the table. I thought he might say something, some version of the conversation he'd practiced in the guest room over 9 nights. An explanation. A justification. Some arrangement of words that would reframe what had happened into something more comfortable for him to carry. He didn't say anything. He straightened his jacket. He nodded once to no one in particular. He walked to the door. Amber gathered her legal pad and followed him. She paused at the door, one hand on the frame, and looked back at me. The burgundy braids, the oversized blazer, the expression I hadn't expected, the one in the neighborhood of regret. "Elizabeth," she said. I looked at her. She didn't finish whatever she'd started. She nodded once small, something private in it, and walked out. The door closed. The room was quiet. Diane Chen exhaled slowly and set down her pen. Harold was looking at his hands again. Thomas was organizing documents. Kezia was making notes in a small spiral notebook. Patricia looked at me. "Congratulations, Miss Crawford," she said. Outside the glass walls, Atlanta went about its Monday. Traffic, a delivery truck. The ordinary machinery of a city that did not know what had just happened 22 floors above it. Did not know and did not need to, because the people in this room knew. And the documents in this room said so, and that was enough. I looked at the table. My table, the one I'd chosen from a showroom on Peachtree 7 years ago. The one that had sat in this room through every deal and every pitch and every late night and one particular Tuesday morning 2 weeks ago that had set all of this in motion. I pulled the CEO transition document toward me. I picked up the pen Patricia had placed beside it. A Mont Blanc, her own, because she billed by the hour and liked the weight of it. I looked at the signature line. Elizabeth Ann Crawford, Chief Executive Officer. I signed my name. The first domino fell at 11:17. I know the exact time because I was still in the conference room when Patricia's phone buzzed. And she looked at the screen and said without looking up, "Marcus's corporate card has been flagged." He tried to use it at the Ritz-Carlton on Peachtree. A pause. It declined. Thomas was packing documents into the banker's box. He didn't react. Kezia wrote something in her notebook. I looked out the window at Atlanta below us. How did that happen so quickly? I asked. I called the card administrator Friday morning, Patricia said. Standard protocol when majority-controlled transfers. The card system updates automatically upon filing of the transition document, which Kezia submitted electronically at 9:41. She said it the same way she said everything, as if she had simply been waiting for a process to complete that had been running for some time. I stayed in the building for 4 hours after the meeting. Not in the conference room in my office, the one at the end of the hall with 2 windows and the view of Stone Mountain on clear days. The nameplate on the door still said Elizabeth Crawford, CFO. I looked at it when I walked in. I left it where it was. There were things that needed doing, and I preferred to do them while the morning was still fresh, before anyone had time to regroup or reframe or begin the particular work of people who have lost something and need to make the losing someone else's fault. The first call was to James Whitfield in Savannah. James, I said, I want to let you know there have been some significant changes at the firm. I'm calling to tell you directly before you hear it another way. I told him the shape of it, not the details, not the marriage, not the 9 days. Just the corporate facts. Majority shareholder. Leadership transition. New CEO. A pause. Then, is the new CEO someone I know? It's me, I said. Another pause. This one different in quality. Well, James said. That makes sense. And then, when can we meet? I scheduled him for Thursday. I called 3 more clients before noon. Every one of them said some version of the same thing in different words, that they had always worked with Reed Consulting because of the financial side, because of the consistency, because of the person who answered the phone at 11 p.m. during a deal closing and knew the numbers without looking them up. I wrote their names in my notebook. Below the date. Below the underline. Brandon Cole came to my office at 12:30. He knocked twice, which I appreciated. He was still in the suit that didn't fit. I was beginning to think it was his only one, and he stood in the doorway with the expression of a 29-year-old who has just understood in a very concrete way the difference between being hired by someone who has authority and being hired by someone who believed they had authority. Miss Crawford, he said. Brandon, I said. Come in. Sit down. He sat. He had his hands folded in his lap in the way of someone who has decided that stillness is the safest available option. I want you to know, he said, that I had no idea, Brandon. I said, I'm not interested in what you knew or didn't know. I'm interested in whether you can do the job. I looked at him. Can you do the job? He blinked. Yes, I think so. I'm still learning some of the... Good, I said. You're going to spend the next 2 weeks with Devin from IT pulling every financial transaction from January 1st to today. Every vendor payment, every expense report, every client invoice. You're going to organize them chronologically and flag anything that doesn't have a corresponding authorization from before June 3rd. I paused. That's your job right now. Can you do that? He straightened slightly in the chair. The suit shifted with him. Yes, he said. I can do that. Good, I said. Start this afternoon. He stood to leave. At the door, he stopped and turned back. Miss Crawford, he said. For what it's worth, I read the financial models you built for the Whitfield account. They're really good. I looked at him. Thank you, Brandon, I said. Close the door on your way out. The second domino fell at 2:15. Devin called my direct line, not Marcus's mine, because Patricia had filed the administrative transfer that morning and the company directory had updated at noon. Miss Crawford, he said. And there was something in his voice, a careful neutrality, the sound of a man recalibrating. I wanted to let you know that I've been restoring your system access as of this morning per the transition documents. You should have full admin credentials now. Thank you, Devin. A pause. I also wanted to say I'm sorry about the password situation. In February, Mr. Reed told me it was a standard security update and that you'd been notified. I know I said, you were doing your job. Yes, ma'am. Another pause. I've been with this firm for 4 years. I'd like to stay if that's Devin. I said you called me the moment the directory updated. That tells me what I need to know. I'll see you Thursday. The third domino was the one I hadn't planned for. At 3:40, Patricia called. Are you sitting down? She said. Yes. Marcus's personal attorney, not Jeffrey, his estate attorney, contacted my office an hour ago. It appears that in February, Marcus refinanced the house. The one in both your names. I was quiet. He took out a $1.2 million line of credit against the equity, Patricia said. The proceeds went into a personal account that is not a joint account. He did not inform you of the refinancing. I looked out the window at Atlanta. Stone Mountain in the distance, faint and blue-gray in the afternoon haze. Can he do that? I said. Not without your signature, Patricia said, which means someone forged my signature. The notary who witnessed the document is under investigation as of 40 minutes ago. A pause. Elizabeth, this is no longer just a corporate matter. I sat with that for a moment. The weight of it. The particular quality of being betrayed, not once, but in layers, each one underneath the previous. The way you peel something back, expecting to find the bottom, and find, instead, another layer and another. What do we do? I said. We let the process work, Patricia said. I've already been in contact with the Fulton County DA's office. This is their domain now, not ours. Our job was always the corporate side. We did our job. A pause, and then more quietly, Are you okay? The second time she'd asked me that in 9 days. I thought about what it meant that she was asking again. I'm processing, I said. That's honest, she said. Take tonight, tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, we'll talk about next steps. The fourth domino I heard about secondhand. One of the account directors, a woman named Sonia, who had been with the firm for 5 years, and had always been cordial in the careful way of someone who worked hard and kept her head down, knocked on my door at 4:30. I'm sorry to bother you, she said. I thought you should know. Amber resigned about an hour ago. She left a letter on Marcus's. She stopped. On the desk. The CEO desk. A pause. Your desk, I mean. I'm sorry. I'm still adjusting to it's fine. Sonia, I said. Thank you for telling me. She started to leave. Then she turned back and something shifted in her face, the careful composure of a woman who had been holding something for a long time and had decided today of all days to put it down. Miss Crawford, she said, I want you to know I've watched how this firm runs for 5 years. I know who does what. I've always known. She paused. I'm glad you're here. I looked at her. Thank you, Sonia, I said. Close the door on your way out. I left the building at 5:30. The parking deck was mostly empty. My car was where I'd left it. Same spot I'd parked in for 7 years, second level, near the stairwell, a habit so old it had stopped being a decision. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine. The Breitling was gone. That was how I thought about it, not as Marcus leaving or the marriage ending or the company changing hands, but as the Breitling going. The silver watch he had never taken off for 11 years that had been in the room for every contract signing and client dinner and Sunday morning and Tuesday morning, that had caught the light when he slid an envelope across a table, and again when he signed a document that took his name off the door. Gone. Along with whatever version of the future I had once believed we were building. I thought about that for exactly as long as it deserved, which was not very long. Then I started the car. I drove home through Atlanta in the early evening light Peachtree to Piedmont, the long way past the restaurant where Marcus and I had eaten on our third date, and the coffee shop where I'd drafted the first financial model for what would become Reed Consulting Group on a Sunday afternoon in 2010, with a yellow legal pad and a Bic pen. I drove past all of it. I didn't stop. When I got home, I fed the cat. I stood at the kitchen counter and looked at the hydrangeas, still holding pale blue. 5 days after I'd bought them at the Publix, on the way home from being fired. I took the navy folder from my desk and put it back in the locked drawer of the filing cabinet. I rekeyed it. Then I went to my office, sat down, and opened my laptop. I had a company to run. The story broke on a Wednesday. Not the way I would have chosen. I would have chosen for it not to break at all. Or at least, not yet, not while the legal process was still finding its shape. But Atlanta's business community is a small world. With a long memory and a short distance between a courthouse filing and a contact list, and by Wednesday morning, the Fulton County public record of the shareholder resolution was 3 days old, and someone had found it. The first call came from a reporter at the Atlanta Business Chronicle at 8:47. I let it go to voicemail. The second came from a writer at a national business publication at 9:15. I let that go too. By 10 o'clock, Patricia had sent a text. Do not speak to press. Refer everything to me. I wasn't planning to. I found out about the article the way most people find out about things written about them, from someone else in a text with a link. Sonia knocked on my door at 11:30. I thought you should see this, she said, and held out her phone. The headline was more measured than I'd expected from the Chronicle, which had a history of treating Atlanta business drama with the breathless enthusiasm of a city that takes its commerce personally. Ownership dispute at Reed Consulting Group. Results in leadership change, it read. Then in smaller text, wife of founder assumes CEO. Where role after shareholder vote. Forgery allegations surface in connection with home refinancing. I read it standing up. It was accurate in the facts and restrained in the framing, which meant the reporter had a good editor or a good source. Probably both. The comments section, which I should not have looked at, and looked at anyway, was a different matter. 412 people had received that Monday email. Apparently, a significant percentage of them had opinions. Always knew Elizabeth ran that place. Heard she built the whole financial model from scratch. Marcus just showed up to the pitches. $47 million. Let that sink in. I put the phone down on my desk. Thank you, Sonia, I said. There's more, she said. She looked faintly uncomfortable. It's on social media. It's moving pretty fast. By noon, it had moved very fast. I didn't look at it directly. Patricia had been clear on that. And I trusted her clarity more than I trusted my own composure where social media was concerned. But the shape of it came to me through the day in fragments, the way news does when people around you are watching it in real time and you are trying not to. James Whitfield called at noon, not to our Thursday appointment, but right then because he'd seen the article and wanted to say without being asked, that his firm's contract was with Reed Consulting Group and he had full confidence in the current leadership. Current leadership, he said. That's you, Elizabeth. I know James. I want it in writing, he said. A letter of continued engagement. I'm sending one to you today. I'd appreciate a counter-signature. You'll have it by 5, I said. 2 more clients called that afternoon with the same request. By the end of the day, I had countersigned 3 letters of continued engagement, totaling $4.2 million in annual contract value. Patricia filed them with the corporate records at 5:15. The forgery investigation moved faster than I expected. This was Patricia's doing, though she would have described it simply as preparation. She had identified the notary in March, 2 months before the meeting, while reviewing the refinancing documents Marcus had filed with the county, and had begun building the evidentiary record quietly in the way she built everything 1 brick at a time. No mortar wasted. By Thursday, the DA's office had a case file. By Friday, Marcus had received a target letter. His estate attorney called Patricia on Friday afternoon. The conversation, as Patricia relayed it to me with her characteristic economy of description, was brief. His attorney was exploring cooperation. Marcus was, by all available evidence, beginning to understand that the shape of the next several years of his life was being determined by decisions he'd made in February, while believing he was untouchable. "What does cooperation mean?" I asked. "It means he tells them everything about the notary and anyone else involved in the forgery, and in exchange, the DA considers his level of culpability." A pause. "It also means he is not in a position to contest the divorce filing when that comes from any position of leverage." I looked out the window. "Patricia," I said, "when I file, I want the house." "You're entitled to it," she said. "It's in both your names, and the forgery nullifies the refinancing lien. The house is clean." "Good. Is that all you want?" I thought about it. The kitchen table. The hydrangeas along the back fence that I'd planted 4 years ago and that came up every spring whether I thought about them or not. The corner office with the view of Stone Mountain on clear days. "For now," I said. The industry response arrived in the way of Atlanta through dinners and phone calls, and the particular social infrastructure of a city where business and community are not separate categories. On Thursday evening, I attended a standing monthly dinner for women in financial services that I'd been a member of for 6 years, but had attended irregularly in the past 2 for reasons I now understood more clearly in retrospect. 12 women around a table at a restaurant on Buckhead. I had told none of them I was coming, had decided that morning on an impulse that felt more like reclaiming something than making a new decision. When I walked in, Diane Chen was already seated. She looked up when I came in. She nodded once, the same contained nod she'd given in the conference room hallway Monday morning. Then she pulled out the chair beside her. I sat. We didn't talk about the meeting, or the article, or Marcus. We talked about a new infrastructure bill moving through the Georgia legislature that had implications for logistics consulting. We talked about a young woman in her firm who was doing interesting work in supply chain modeling. We talked about the hydrangeas briefly when she mentioned her garden. At the end of the evening, she said as she was putting on her coat, "You should have done this years ago." She didn't specify what this was. She didn't need to. "I know," I said. Marcus moved out of the house on a Saturday. I wasn't there. I'd gone to my mother's house in Decatur, the same house, the same kitchen table, the hydrangeas she'd planted along the front walk the spring after my father left. And that had come back every year since without her having to do anything about them. I sat at the table and drank coffee and told her the shape of it, the parts that were mine to tell. She listened without interrupting, the way she'd always listened. Her hands folded on the table, her face still in the way I had tried to learn from for 30 years. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The pen. You still have it, the Bic?" "Yes, it's on my desk," I said. "He didn't take it." She nodded. She looked at the table for a moment, the same table, the same surface, where she had once sat counting quarters, while I watched from the doorway and stored the image somewhere I didn't know I'd kept. "Good," she said. "Keep it." I drove home in the late afternoon. The house was quiet. Marcus's things gone from the spaces they'd occupied, not dramatically, just absent the way furniture leaves marks in a carpet that take a while to disappear. I walked through the rooms once. I opened the back door and stood on the porch and looked at the hydrangeas along the fence, pale blue in the September light, doing what they'd always done without being asked. I thought about the dominoes, the corporate card declining at the Ritz-Carlton, the system access restored, Brandon Cole in the undersized suit going through 6 months of transaction records with the focused energy of someone who had decided correctly that this was his audition. The 3 letters of continued engagement, the target letter, the divorce filing Patricia had prepared and was waiting with characteristic patience for me to authorize. I thought about 11 years. The number behind the number, the $43,000 and the Bic pen, and the operating agreement, and the holding company, and the clause on page 3 that Marcus had never read. I thought about my mother at this same table on a Wednesday morning 30 years ago, very still looking at the wall, not defeated. I understood that now in a way I hadn't at 11. Not broken or resigned, or waiting for something to come save her. Just thinking, calculating, finding the number behind the number in her own quiet way, working out what came next from the materials available. I went inside. I picked up my phone. I called Patricia. "File it," I said. The first document I signed as CEO was a vendor renewal. Not the most dramatic beginning. A 3-year contract with an office supply company paper toner, the kind of thing that keeps a business running without anyone thinking about it. Brandon Cole had flagged it as expiring at the end of the month and left it on my desk with a yellow sticky note that said, "Needs your signature in handwriting," that was careful in the way of someone trying to make a good impression. I signed it with a Bic pen, not for any particular reason I could have articulated at the time. It was just the pen that was there in the small ceramic dish on my desk where it had always been. Old habit, familiar weight. I signed it and put it in the outbox and went on with the morning. It was only later driving home that I thought about it and understood that there had been a reason after all. That the body sometimes knows what the mind is still working out, and that signing that first document with that pen was a way of saying something to myself that I didn't need to say out loud. It was always yours. All of it. From the beginning. October came. The divorce filing had been in Patricia's hands since September. Marcus, operating now from an apartment in Midtown, and under the quiet pressure of the DA's cooperation process, did not contest it. His attorney communicated through Patricia's in the flat, efficient language of people managing a situation rather than arguing one. There were no dramatic phone calls, no confrontations, no versions of the conversations I'd sometimes imagined in the space between sleeping and waking. The explanations, the reckonings, the things said in rooms at last. Just documents, just signatures, just the machinery of legal process doing what it was built to do. The house was mine by the end of November. I stood in the kitchen the evening it was finalized and looked at the hydrangeas through the window, brown, now cut back for winter, the bare stems along the fence doing what bare stems do in November, which is wait. I thought they'll come back in April. I had never once had to remind them. James Whitfield flew up from Savannah in early November for our rescheduled meeting. He brought 2 colleagues, younger members of his logistics team, who had questions about supply chain modeling that Brandon Cole, to his credit, had spent 3 weeks preparing to answer. We sat in the conference room on 22 for 2 hours. James asked good questions and listened carefully, and at the end, he extended the anchor contract for 5 years, which was 2 years longer than it had ever been before. When they were leaving, he stopped at the door. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Sure." "How long did you know before everything happened?" I thought about the chair in the corner, the password. The February morning I'd called Patricia and heard her write something down. "Long enough," I said. He nodded slowly. "That kind of patience," he said, "is rare." I thought about my mother's kitchen table. About 30 years of watching stillness used as strategy. "It's not patience," I said. "It's preparation." He thought about that. Then he shook my hand and left. I rebranded the company in December. Not as Meridian Strategy Partners. Marcus's name for it had lasted exactly 11 days before the shareholder vote, and I had no interest in the navy and gold logo or the stock photography of people in conference rooms who didn't look like anyone I knew. The new name was Navarre Consulting Group. Patricia raised an eyebrow when I told her. Not disapproval, just recognition. The slight lift of a woman who understood exactly what I was doing and found it precise. "The holding company name," she said. "The thing that was always there," I said. even when no one was looking. She considered it. "It's good," she said. "It holds." We filed the new name with the Georgia Secretary of State on December 8th. The website went live December 15th. Clean design, warm tones, photographs of actual work being done by actual people in actual Atlanta offices. A history section that began founded in 2011 by Elizabeth Crawford and her former partner Navarre Consulting Group, has spent 14 years building the financial infrastructure of mid-market businesses throughout the Southeast. Her former partner, not erased, just correctly placed. Given the proportion of the story that was his, which was not nothing, but was also not everything. I read it once after it posted. Then I closed the tab and went back to work. My mother called the morning the new website went live. "I saw it," she said. "What do you think?" A pause. I could picture her at the kitchen table, coffee cup in hand, the hydrangeas along the front walk, dormant under November soil, waiting for April. "I think," she said, "that your grandmother would have said you did it the right way." "What's the right way?" Quietly, she said. "And completely. There is a thing that happens when you have been small in someone else's story for a long time, and you step into the full size of your own. It doesn't feel the way you expect it to feel. There's no fanfare, no particular morning when you wake up and everything is different. It's more like a gradual recalibration, the world adjusting to a new center of gravity slowly, the way water finds its level. I noticed it in small things, the way I walked into rooms. Not differently, I had always walked into rooms the same way, steady and quiet and prepared. But something had shifted in what the rooms did back, the way people turned, the way conversations organized themselves around me rather than despite me. The way I answered the phone. Navarre Consulting Group, Elizabeth Crawford. The way Sonia knocked on my door each morning and waited to be invited in. Not with deference, but with respect, a different thing, a better thing earned rather than assigned. The way Brandon Cole had grown 3 inches metaphorically since September. He still wore the suit that didn't fit. I had stopped noticing. On the last working day of the year, I stayed late. Not for any particular reason. The building was quiet. Most people had left by 4 the week between Christmas and New Year's, having its own particular quality of permission, the world briefly agreeing to let things rest. I sat at my desk as the light outside the windows shifted from gray afternoon to the particular dark blue of Atlanta in winter, the city lights coming up one by one, the way they always did, indifferent and beautiful. I had the Bic pen in my hand. Not writing, just holding it the way you hold something that has become a way of thinking rather than just a tool. I thought about the morning I had walked out of this room with a white envelope in my hand and 9 days on the clock. The elevator, my reflection in the brushed steel. The moment on the sidewalk outside when I had not looked back at the building. I looked at it now. 22 floors, glass and steel. Atlanta behind it, enormous and ongoing. I thought about everything the building had held in its rooms over 14 years. Every deal, every late night, every conversation on yellow legal pads, every chair pushed to corners and pulled back. I thought about the operating agreement and the holding company and the clause on page 3 and the 51% that had always been there. Quiet and patient, like the hydrangeas in winter, waiting for its season. I put the pen back in the ceramic dish. I closed my laptop. I stood at the window for a long time, looking at Atlanta in the dark. Then I turned off the light and walked out. People talk about power like it's something you take, something you fight for in rooms, something you announce. I've learned it differently. The most durable kind of power is the kind that's been there all along, built quietly, documented, carefully held, without display. It doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need to perform. It simply is the way a foundation is, underneath everything doing its work, whether or not anyone is looking at it. My mother understood this. She sat at a kitchen table on a Wednesday morning in Decatur, with $340 in a secret account. And what she had in that moment, what no one could take from her, what she had built in the only space available to her, was clarity. She knew exactly what she had and what she didn't have, and what she was going to do next. That knowledge, quiet and complete, was the foundation. Everything she built after it stood on that. I think about the women I know who have been told in one way or another that the room they're in is not theirs, that the table they helped build is not theirs, that their name doesn't need to be on the door because their contribution is understood and their value is recognized, even if it's never formalized, even if it's never protected, even if the person who benefits most from their work controls whether or not it's ever acknowledged. I want to say this carefully because it matters. Being good at something is not enough. Being indispensable is not protection. The work you do, however extraordinary, does not own itself. You have to own it. Not loudly, not combatively, but precisely. Document it, structure it. Know what you hold and hold it in writing, and understand the difference between being valued and being protected, because they are not the same thing. Prepare, not out of distrust or fear, out of respect for yourself and for the work and for the truth that the people who love you today may not always be the people who have authority over your life tomorrow. And when the moment comes, and it will come in one form or another for almost everyone, you want to be the person who already knows the number behind the number. The pen I used to sign the first documents of my new company was a blue Bic ballpoint from a CVS on Ponce de Leon, purchased in 2011, held in a ceramic dish on my desk for 14 years. It had no monetary value. Marcus hadn't thought to take it. That tells you everything you need to know about the difference between a person who understands what a thing is worth and a person who only understands what it costs. Know your worth. Write it down. Hold it quietly. And when someone underestimates you, let them. 9 days is enough.